Hello, racing fans, and welcome to Belmont Week here on FanDuel TV and our social media FanDuel networks. Caleb Keller with you, and about to have a very special guest join me here in just a bit. But if you're unfamiliar, today we are talking about herd dynamics, which essentially is the mental and emotional component of these thoroughbreds that are putting it all on the line for us to watch these amazing races. And needless to say, the first two renditions of this year's Triple Crown Derby and the Preakness have certainly lived up to the billing and then some. And now we get to see the Belmont Stakes coming up this Saturday at Saratoga for the second straight year, going at the mile and a quarter distance. But in terms of herd dynamics, when I first got into horse racing and really started with FanDuel TV, I heard about this guy who was profiling the emotional look inside of the cockpit, essentially, of these horses and how the mind translates to the physical performance. And it was really fascinating. His results speak for themselves. I've told you all many times, if you follow, the first year that he did a report on the Kentucky Derby was 2011, and his top herd dynamic horse was Animal Kingdom. And in 2012, his top herd dynamic horse was I'll Have Another. And of the first 8 reports he did in the Derby, the winner was in his top 2 selections. So with that being said, Kerry Thomas, I would like to bring you into the show here, and looking forward to this. Now, you usually give us essentially one report each year, the Kentucky Derby, but this year we twisted your arm, and right now the competitor's edge there on Brisnet is out, and you've given us our first Belmont report.
Yeah, well, I was excited to do it. I had the time to do it, and I've been thinking for the last few years about, it would be fun to do some more races because obviously I love it, and I'm like, well, it takes so much time for me to do, the races, especially with bigger fields, that I can't do every race, but I can do select races. So I think this year, and the Belmont is kind of the start of that. I'm going to be selecting special races and doing some reports because it's really fun, and I like to watch and track the evolution of these horses and then share that with people who follow my work.
Okay, so we're going to start out with the origin story of how you came to know so much about the mental and emotional component, and then we're going to get to some basic terminology, and then we're going to get into the contenders. But essentially, you spent almost a decade in the wild observing, what was it, mountain lions, steeds, all different types of herds. Tell us about how you came to know the herd structure of these animals.
Well, to make a very long story short, it's the interesting thing about it is I'm colorblind. So when I went out and started watching, wild horses and just wild animals in general, because when I was younger, I was like, oh, I want to be a zoologist, so you go out and you do your independent research. And, in Montana, Wyoming, of course, there's the prior mountain Mustangs out there. And I started to study those, and I realized that, it was like, wow, these are horses living in the wild. I grew up here in southeastern Pennsylvania, and you notice I'm not in the back of my truck this time, as I was for the Derby report. But I was fascinated by the fact that there was horses living in the wild, and for me, studying these horses, I had no background in horses at all. I was a completely clean slate, and my perspective was just completely learning observationally. I say my laboratory was Mother Nature, and my teacher was the horses. And being colorblind, I didn't look at the horses for what they look like. I had to pick out their behavior dynamics, if you will. Not their physical conformation, but their emotional conformation. And I started to, realize all these interesting little nuances about how they communicated, how they moved, their interactions, the herd structure, the herd dynamics, and it controls everything in their lives. So it was really fascinating for me. And then fast forward, years later, you continue that research, you keep evolving, you learn more from where you were wrong than where you were right. And here we are today.
Now, you have some terminology that you use. It's, even though it sounds complex, you make them very learnable. But the two things that I want the audience to know is herd dynamics broke into group herd dynamic, essentially your awareness of where you're at in the group and your understanding of where you're at in the group, and then individual herd dynamic, which would be maybe a front runner running individually, or the independent battles that happen. If you're in 7th, you need to independently take over the horse in 6th, and so on. So tell us the difference in group and independent
Well,
dynamics.
yeah, and of course there's a dictionary on the website. You can check it out, and the Competitor's Edge has the link to all these terms. But in essence, herd psychology, the horse psychology, is made up of a couple of different components. You have individual part of that psychology, that one-to-one linear focus. Now, males, because of their role in the herd, roughly 75% of their psychology is focused on individual targets, individual things, because that's their job. Very linear. They're looking for mates, they're running off stragglers, they're looking for predators, things like that. The group dynamic really is immersive for the fillies and mares because of their job in the herd. And they need to know what's happening all around them almost simultaneously to be emotionally intelligent enough to be, higher up on the herd totem pole. And so fillies have a slant one way, males have a slant the other way. Of course, our breeding mixes a lot of these things up. So those pure dynamics that you see in nature those numbers aren't quite the same. But yes, individual dynamics are where the horse competes. The group dynamic is the underwriter of that performance. It is the underwriter of full sensory awareness, of self-awareness, and where you are, where am I compared to you. And the individual dynamic says, I'm coming at you, that kind of thing. So that's where the competitive part takes place. And the GHD is the underwriter of that.
And you mentioned many times before that the herd structure is always changing. It's not like this horse is always better or more dominant than this horse, always changing. And especially you mentioned with the males and what we'll call a bachelor herd. We see the fillies. We've seen, Wink, she went 3 years without losing a race. Zenyatta went forever without losing a race. Good Cheers, gone a long time, being the queen of the fillies. But on the bachelor herd dynamic, it's way more competitive for being the herd leader.
Yeah. And one thing to keep in mind, with humans aside, bachelor herd dynamics especially is a contact sport. I mean, they like to roughhouse and they like to get after it, especially if they're very close on that structure. One day you might get me, next day I might get you. It could go back and forth and back and forth. And that's the nature of it. And that's why these races, these high level races, it doesn't matter to the horse how many horses are in this race, because bachelor herds are small. These races break down into small fragments. I'm going to target you. You're going to target me. I'm going to target them. It's not one of those things where the larger the field, that's more of a visual thing for us. But for horses, they pick out their peers and combatants.
Now, you mentioned the bachelor herd is a contact sport, and that seamlessly gets us in to our morning line favorite, journalism. Again, these are all going to be at Kerry's report at Brisnet. Each horse has a long profile. But let's get to the stirring rendition of the Preakness Stakes. Speaking of that contact sport turning for home, and we're going to pick up right here from the start where journalism was the 2-horse. He's second off the rail. And you mentioned that he's no longer the emotionally efficient colt with untapped gears. He's a proven warrior whose internal operating system now runs with elite level intention and execution.
Yeah, and you know what's cool? Like this, watch right there. So you can see he gets a little bit PO'd because you see his tail go up a little bit. There's some emotional stress in there, and he is like, son of a, but he's controlling himself. He's going to use that energy later. But it's really interesting to see the emotions flowing through these horses, moment to moment, which is what I love to study.
And you mentioned a stiffening of the tail showed annoyance, but his posture showed control.
Exactly. So he had control, and that's a sign of an elite herd dynamic psychology, that you can still maintain a purposeful, fluid motion, even under duress, especially under competitive stress, because you didn't lose your cookies. You got a little pissed off, but you didn't lose it.
And you mentioned that in the gate, he was sharper and louder, a warrior humming with anticipation before this race.
Yes. And if you watch him right there, once he gets through all that, he's starting to really, you can just see a horse that's got a whole ton of purpose in his movement. Just look at that. There's a ton of energy in there. I mean, from my eyes, after studying thousands and thousands of horses in this manner, I'm getting goose bumps watching this, because I just don't know what's going to happen, but I think something's going to happen. If I didn't know what happened at the end of the race, if I'm just watching this, I'm looking at a horse that's full of purpose, and he's coming after somebody.
And here comes the moment, the collision at the top of the stretch as he's going to bowl his way through. You mentioned no longer asking politely. He became the psychological equivalent of a dominant bachelor colt, breaking through with brute emotional authority.
And what's interesting for me is, like, I saw that behavior time and time again watching bachelor herds in the wild. I mean, that's normal stallion colt behavior. And, especially when you're getting into a situation like that. And he just pretty much said, no, I'm taking this spot and you're going to have to push me out, or I'm pushing you out. And, and yes, there's human factors involved in that and things like that. But you could take away the humans, and that still very likely would happen, because it does happen. And to me, it's one of those moments where he says, I've had enough. And this is my moment. And the thing about herd dynamics is you can have a horse that is emotionally intelligent and higher level than other horses in a race, but they have to have the physical talent to optimize that. They have to have the right jockey. They have, there's a lot of circumstances involved. Just because you're the most elite horse on the herd dynamic scale doesn't mean you're going to win every race. Horses can lead from any position. They can lead from second, third. I mean, they see the world in the circle. So leadership to them is not necessarily finishing in front at a finish line, per se. You can have a horse win. You could beat me, but I could be dictating your rhythm, and basically I controlled you, even though you crossed the line first. But in this case, he was not going to be denied, and I loved it.
And we mentioned the individual herd dynamic and the group herd dynamic. You mentioned his strength, fully matured group herd dynamic. And you mentioned before, you work up a growth curve, but sometimes you can reach the zenith of knowing exactly where you're at in the herd.
Yeah, and what's awesome about that is you're seeing a complete picture there. You're seeing a fully optimized group dynamic. He knew exactly where he was, where his feet were falling, how close the other horses were, whether they were touching him or not, and still where he was going. He never lost linear sight. Like, this is the direction I'm going in. All this is happening around me, but this is where I'm going. And that was a high function. That was that group dynamic. If he didn't have a strong group dynamic, there could have been a serious problem there. And it's a testament to the elite herd dynamics that he has in that group dynamic. And you're seeing an example of how the group dynamic underwrites performance, because without that strong group dynamic, he would have had to rely on completely turn a foot to escape that. But he didn't. He did it through purpose. And he dialed right back into that IHD, which was really exciting for me to watch.
Now, as amazing as journalism has been, ever since that win on March 1st, he's basically been the leader of the trail. He was the clear favorite in the Derby. We showed you the Preakness, but he was defeated by Sovereignty in the Kentucky Derby. And even though there are some similarities in their profile, there's also some differences. And you mentioned that Sovereignty is emotionally sophisticated and doesn't give away excess energy, either physically or psychologically. I've always told people that, like, when you play a video game, you got like your health bar and it's full. Well, some horses can leak that health, whether it be anxiety before the race, in the gate, during the race, and Sovereignty keeps that 100% intact.
He does. And if you look at the difference from a herd dynamic standpoint or the psychological standpoint, journalism wears his heart on his sleeve, where Sovereignty keeps it a little bit more tactical and as far as what he's going to show you. And it's very interesting here because, the best thing that happened to Sovereignty in the Derby was being in this position, being the chaser. At the beginning of the race, he got kind of squeezed back a little bit, and he had to exercise patience to find his position. And that really let journalism plow the road for him, because journalism is that kind of horse. He's going to go after it that way. And Sovereignty very smartly slithered his way up in there, and journalism was plowing the road. He got in a position, and there's a moment you can see that journalism was like, "Oh, I'm not giving this to you," and there's no shame. Journalism didn't win the race, but he didn't lose the race. He just didn't win. There's a difference between losing and losing the race and losing the combat. He didn't win this race, but he didn't lose it from a herd structure standpoint. But Sovereignty did a fantastic job. It was a great ride and very timed and very controlled, and took advantage of the environment that was in front of him. And he also learned a lot from that race. So he's going to come in. He's coming into the Belmont with, a set of fresh legs and a very nice growth pattern in the works. And I'm pumped for the rematch.
And, journalism has so much, sheer force and aggression. Whereas you mentioned with Sovereignty, he doesn't seek dominance through aggression. And also you mentioned that, Junior Alvarado told us after the race that a lot of the jockeys wanted to follow journalism because they knew that he could kind of clear the path. You mentioned that Sovereignty, he used his group herd dynamic strength to mentally coast and let others do
it was brilliantly done. Brilliantly done. And the thing is, like, you can use the group dynamic is still competitive in as much as it is your energy conservation. It allows you just to cruise along, optimize that mind to body fluency, save your energy, and then you just kind of dial that up. When you find your spot, then you amp it up into IHD. You don't have to race the whole time. You don't have to compete the whole time. You got to pick your spots. It's kind of like a basketball player picking his shots, or a baseball player waiting for that pitch. You might take a strike, you might take two strikes, but you're waiting for your pitch. And Sovereignty was waiting for his pitch, and it was very, very tactical and versatile, mentally versatile, and it was extremely well done. I mean, you won the race, but Both these horses are elite in different ways, and they're both at the top of their game in different ways. And it's really going to be interesting to see. It's a shame it's not a mile and a half.
Mm.
I would like the dynamics would change. The configuration of Saratoga is going to be a little bit different than a normal Belmont, obviously. So that plays into it as well. And so it's going to be interesting to see. It's going to be kind of a ditto in a lot of ways of what we saw in May.
And at FanDuel TV, we've done the side-by-side comparison, journalism and sovereignty. It feels like it could be an amazing two-horse battle, but a horse like Baeza, his younger brother Mage won the Kentucky Derby. His other younger brother Dornick won the Belmont. And what I'm seeing in Baeza is that he's raced from the middle of the pack. But you mentioned on the Derby report and on the Belmont report that he's a colt that wants to lead from the front, not just in body, but in spirit. And you mentioned he's got a strong individual herd dynamic, even though he's had to use most of the group herd here recently.
And the thing I like about Baeza, and I was very impressed. I mean, his Derby run, in my opinion, was like needs to be applauded. I mean, you're what you saw at the Derby with Baeza from a psychological standpoint, at least from my point of view, in studying these horses, is this was a beautiful growth pattern. I was watching an emergent property take place and happen before my eyes in the Derby, and I'm excited for him coming into the Belmont. You don't want to sleep on this horse. I mean, this is a competitor. He's climbing the ladder of herd dynamic structure in a way as far as the hierarchy goes, but he's at the threshold, in my opinion. He's got tons of talent. He's got the makeup to be, he belongs in this race. He belongs, we're not always talking about him in the same breath as sovereignty and journalism, but Baeza has earned his right to be there. If you watch this right here, there's no quit. These are the three best horses, the three best colts, in my opinion, that I have seen so far this year. And so the fact that they're all in the Belmont it could be just those three horses, and I would be perfectly happy because, in a basher herd structure, it's going to break into twos or threes anyway.
When I watched that Derby back, every horse wanted to try to follow journalism because they know that he would pave the way. And Baeza was actually in that spot for a moment, and then Sovereignty beat him to the spot. Pratt had to dive to the inside. He caught a little bit of traffic. He had to pause just a little bit, and that might have caused him second. But in the report, you mentioned what's especially noteworthy with Baeza is his evolving ability to delay gratification. In earlier efforts, he showed signs of wanting to do too much too soon.
Too soon, yeah. And that's a sign of maturity. See, when I'm tracking these horses, and this is why I like doing, I'm going to really enjoy following these horses through the different races this year and leading into November, is watching this evolution. I do this with my private clients, and I track the evolution. We're always updating the files and updating the race, the performances, and tracking the growth patterns. Where are they improving? Where are they not improving? What can we do in training to fix this, or how we can help that? And I'm obviously not involved in these horses personally, so I'm doing it from an abstract point of view. But when I see this growth, I'm like, okay, there's some nuggets here, and the dial is, the needle's moving up for this horse, a horse like this. When I see small incremental changes, and that's everything, because in racing, a split second can be 10 feet. You know what I mean? It's like one of these things where, and to note that he was able to essentially kind of re-kick in that race. He had the positioning and things like that. That's also a sign of maturity, that that you want a horse that's mentally versatile, because situational chaos in races, especially the classic races, you need to have a horse that's, can handle situational chaos. Yes, you need a jockey that can anticipate it, but there's nothing like having the horse that can anticipate these things before they happen and be, responsive to them in a purposeful way. And when horses can do that, you have something really strong to build upon.
You mentioned that Baeza is honing in that timing of waiting to give that delayed gratification to make his true move. Doesn't necessarily apply to our next contender, Rodriguez, whose speed, of course, is his best quality. And you mentioned with Rodriguez, he's not wired to wait. His mind doesn't build pressure gradually. It discharges it like a spring.
He just like, I say this tongue in cheek, of course, but I often talk, I'm telling my friends, like, oh, that's a point and shoot horse. Like he just wants a lane and take off, And the thing is, you're really not going to steer this horse all that much. You're kind of riding out that burn. And there's a boatload of talent here. I mean, it's quite obvious. Beautiful mover. You see by the posture. Take a look at the posture at the end of the wire right there with Mike Smith on board. Now, Mike Smith, a great a great jockey that can absorb a horse's stress. He thinks for the horse. He works with the horses. Some jockeys do, some jockeys don't. But if you look at this is a very posture relaxed horse, except for his psychological burn, that IHD. It's a heavy shift, and he's just like, he's spinning, and when he's wide-eyed and bushy-tailed. He gets in that gate, he's like, let's go, let's go, let's go. Coming with me? I don't care, I'm going. And there's what you gain in that fortitude of IHD, which is extremely valuable as a racehorse. As a competitor, you got to watch out that the versatility is not there. So in these cases like this, the rider, the jockey has to think for the horse. The jockey has to be the group dynamic. If your horse doesn't have that naturally, but they have a ton of talent and they have the IHD, that's where the jockey comes in. That's where training comes in. But you have to put that together, and somebody has to pick up that slack, because you can get away with it at a certain company. Sprint races especially, it's kind of like bam, bam, bam. But when you get into the classic races against high level competition, there's going to be times, more often than not, that you're going to need to make some mental changes to your pattern. And if the horse is unable to do it, the rider or the person on board needs to be able to do that for them.
You mentioned a huge slant towards the individual herd dynamic of him wanting to run freely and by himself. Now, that was looking much better until the long shot Crudo got entered into the race. And you mentioned with Crudo that he approached his performance with a go first and ask questions later mentality.
Yeah. Crudo's an interesting horse to me. I mean, we could be seeing anything happen here. So this is going to be fun to watch. You have a horse that's got that very youthful, very playful, kind of like, come on, let's go. Again, you got this bright eyes, full of energy and a lot of talent. It's not refined. It's not refined talent. It doesn't mean it can't win. It is very competitive talent. But yeah, it's going to be interesting. I like this horse. I liked, he's very early on his psychological growth pattern. So there's a lot of loose ends here. You have a Mustang with some loose parts that are needing to be tightened up, but not too far, because you don't want to overdo it. So there's a lot of finesse here that needs to happen, but the horse is fun to watch, and there's a lot inside there. There's a lot inside there.
And you mentioned he's got basically a pretty powerful bubble that the horse that he's faced don't really want to run in close combat against them, but he's also never faced the likes of Baeza, Sovereign.
Well, that's in the present company, horses will create what I call the workspace. I call it the cushion. There's like that mental workspace of that sphere of awareness around you, that this is my space. Some horses, you can see it when you walk up to a horse. If you can push a horse, things like that. There's that space that's away from their body. How big is that? For a racehorse to fully optimize physical talent, their sensory system, if it has to clear space at least twice as fast as the body's moving, so that you have this space to move into. If not, you see pressure being built up. Horses are going to slow down. It's kind of like I said before, if you're driving down the road and you're going 80 miles an hour, which maybe you shouldn't be, but you hit a foggy patch, all of a sudden your sensory perception is not as far in front of you. So what do? You have to slow your physical pace down to match how far you can see in front of you. So it's kind of the same thing. It is the same thing. Horses have to identify, interpret, and they have to identify, interpret, process, and respond. There's a process that happens while they're moving, and some horses do it better than others.
Now, Hill Road runs from off the pace, which you would think would be more group herd dynamic leaning, but actually you mentioned that he's more in the individual herd dynamic category. And if you were a trainer, based on reading your reports for 10 plus years, I feel like you would never put blinkers on a racehorse. You mentioned way back with Will Take Charge, you mentioned strongly that the blinkers should come off. He ran with the blinkers on all Triple Crown, barely got a whiff. They took the blinkers off. He became the champion 3-year-old. So Hill Road did get the win in the Peter Pan, but what did you think about that effort?
Well, I think that's the effort I talked about, the boat without the rudder. I mean, if you watch that, I mean, yes, he won the race, but I'm a proponent of letting nature take its course, because equipment, yes, there are times when it's needed. I understand that. But in reality, a young horse, let them have that growth pattern, work with them. And to me, the blinkers for him, it's just condensing this oblique, sensory awareness. He just doesn't have it. So you're pushing all this into one spot. It wasn't high functioning before, and now it's not functioning at all. And if you watch him, I call it like a boat in the water without the rudder. It says, you get the spinning going on. And that's because there's no sensory guardrails. There's the sensory guardrails. Again, he's moving at a high rate of speed. His sensory system is not keeping up. So when it's not keeping up, you get that float. You get this float, or you get this up. You see the horses change their position, how their feet are hitting the ground. You can tell that sometimes they're seems to be going more up and down as far as the forward propulsion, things like that. That means that your sensory clearance is not clearing the space fast enough. So two things have to happen. Either the jockey has to really be strongly intent on finding a target out front for the horse to go to, or you just have to change your pace. And a lot of these things, you can work on in workouts and exercise patterns.
One thing that got me so fascinated with your work was growing up, I played tournament golf. And I remember being introduced to Dr. Bob Rotella and his books. He was a sports psychologist. And I read one of his mental game books, and it unlocked this power that I had to bring out better scores. It didn't have anything to do with my physical. I changed nothing in my technique. It was just the mental. And when I see your profile on Uncaged, I saw this a lot in golf, where the kid had talent, but they were thinking way too much. And you mentioned with Uncaged, he simply carries a weight with him as though his thoughts get caught in transit from head to hoof.
Yeah, he almost confuses himself, in certain ways. And, so Uncaged is a type of horse that needs, again, you have physical talent, but the psychology, as far as being athletically expressive, has some holes in it, so he needs some help. And so it doesn't mean he can't win, doesn't mean he can't compete, doesn't mean he can't be a good athlete. But here again, the horse with more holes in their psychology and their herd dynamic and their sensory system need more help from the rider. They need more help from the environment. They need the environment to be just right. They need the jockey to put them in the right spots. And the bottom line is the operating system runs the machine. Okay, I don't care what is the sport. Right? These horses feel stress. They have emotions. I mean, it's their emotions that endear us to them. To me, it's foolish not to translate that into well, how does it affect them as an athlete? If it affects them at the feeding trough and at the watering hole or at the shed, breeding shed, and going off the trailer, in and out of the trailer, you think it's not going to affect them out here? Of course it does. And the bottom line is, you got to remember too that in competition, when there's the competitive stresses going on, horses will respond to environmental stress within their herd structure differently than they're going to respond to stresses that are imposed upon us by people. So what you see at the barn and things like that may not be what you see on the racetrack, because now I'm with my buddies and I'm on the playground and we're duking it out. So there's a whole different dynamic.
And look, any horse that makes a Triple Crown race, we know has a lot of physical talent. But when
Absolutely.
we get to, the long shots, like our last one here, Heart of Honor, pretty similar to Uncaged, his body wants to run, but his mind stalls at the starting line, tangled in a sensory net it can't quite shake free from.
Yeah. You ever heard the saying that sometimes you're writing checks your butt can't cash kind of thing? I think in some way, that's a nod to my grandfather. It may not really fit here, but what I'm saying? It's like, you can overthink it. Okay, I'll give you an example. Like, I do a lot of presentations. We're getting ready to go to Portugal in July, where I'm presenting at a big event, the Horse Economic Forum. And it's going to be an amazing event. I'm already thinking, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't lay an egg. I do this. I've done this all around the world, but I start to feel a little bit of anxiety. And the thing is, you can practice and practice and practice. But when you get in that batter's box, you're ready to face down that pitcher, right? There's a difference between physical talent and psychological capacity. And that's the difference between these horses at this level, especially over the classic distance. Again, when we go into sprint races, physical talent can supersede, because you can kind of outrun your holes up here. But in high level competition, and the longer the duration goes, now there's going to be a little bit more of a mental fortitude that comes in, because mental fatigue will take away a racehorse out, take a race out of the horse more than anything else, more than physical fatigue. You can train a physical horse. You can train the horse to run a mile and a half, mile and a quarter, right? But are they mentally prepared to do it? And not every horse has the natural capacity to be prepared for it, and that's my job when I'm looking at horses, scouting horses, even for pre-purchase, is to identify, are they even able to handle what we're going to ask them to do? And if not, they shouldn't be in there, because there's other things that they can do.
KerryMThomas.com. This is going to be his website. He actually has, if you go to the big race recaps, he has all of his Derby reports, Breeders' Cup, Belmonts over the years. And then I'll show you here at Brisnet. I'm going to leave it a mystery. I'm going to make y'all go download this amazing work of art in my mind. One of my favorite downloads of the year. But it's going to be on Brisnet, and it's going to be the Competitor's Edge for the Belmont this year. Only $20 would be a great $20.
It's also on, and Kev, it's also on the website too, on our toolbar if you want to go there. And I have to say, if you're looking for a fun read, and even if you don't buy the report, but you're looking for a fun read, go to my website and read the new blog, Horses Talk. I think you'll really enjoy it. I had some overflow information, and I got to thinking, wouldn't it be cool to write something from the personal point of view of each horse for the Belmont? And that's what I did. So I think it's a really fun read if you get a chance to check it out.
And if you're in the market to buy a horse, hire this man right here. I'm going to tell you, he doesn't gloat about it, but I'm telling you, this man has helped pick out horses like Run Happy, City of Light, Beauty Generation. So if you want to get into I remember he gave me neck shares. He was like hip 1000. You said the horse was a beast in Lexington. The horse ended up being a grade 1 winner. Nobody paid up for him. So if you're an owner out there, hire this man, and he's going to take you into the driver's seat, get you a really sound horse mentally.
Appreciate that. Yep. Give me a holler. Okay. Well, thanks a lot for having me on. I appreciate the support, and I'm here at home and I run back, and taking care of my mom as a caregiver. So I'm glad we could make this work out. So that's the other reason why I enjoy doing the reports, because it allows me to stay home closer to taking care of mom as well. So your support really means a lot to me.
All right. I consider myself a student of herd dynamics over the last 10 years. Always a pleasure to talk to you. And a special thanks to Emily Shields and our entire crew
Yes.
at
Thanks a
FanDuel
lot.
TV for making this live come together. So, Kerry, let's enjoy a great race this weekend.